My son stood in my small apartment, a place I had called home for 20 years, and looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture he was about to discard. He told me not to expect a single dime from his mother's $55 million will. He called me a relic, a ghost from a past his mother had thankfully escaped. He was so sure, so smug, standing there in his $1,000 shoes that he was about to become a king. But he forgot one simple truth about the past. It never truly dies. And at the will reading, when the lawyer read one single sentence from a dusty old document, my son would learn that the relic he dismissed already owned the entire kingdom. My name is Walter Hayes. I am 75 years old, and my story began, as so many endings do, with a phone call. The phone vibrated against the polished wood of my coffee table, the name Marcus flashing on the screen. It was a name I hadn't seen light up my phone in 6 months. I let it ring twice more before answering, a small, foolish hope fluttering in my chest that maybe, just maybe, this was a call to see how his old man was doing. I should have known better. I pressed the green icon. "Hello, son." There was no warmth in his reply, no preamble, just the cold, sharp edge of business. "Mom's gone," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the grief it was supposed to carry. "This morning, heart failure. The will reading is on Tuesday, 10 a.m., Attorney Chen's office downtown. You should be there." The words hung in the air between us, cold and heavy. Lena, gone. A whole library of memories of shared laughter in a tiny first apartment, of worried nights when Marcus had a fever of the day we signed the divorce papers, not as enemies, but as two partners whose paths had simply diverged. All of it slammed shut in a single moment. Lena and I, we didn't end in fire and fury. We just ended. Like a long book you gently close, sad that the story is over, but grateful for the journey. Marcus, however, had never seen it that way. When the money started pouring in from Lena's ventures, he chose a side. He chose the side with the bigger house, the fancier cars, the country club membership. He began to see me not as his father, but as a photograph from a past he was ashamed of. I was the cracked pavement his mother had built her skyscraper on, an inconvenient reminder of humble beginnings. "I'll be there," I said, my own voice sounding distant to my ears. "Good," he replied, and the line went dead. "No, how are you holding up? No, I'm sorry." Just a click. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I looked at a framed photo on my mantelpiece. It was of a young Lena and me standing in front of a small, unassuming house, our first house, the one we bought with saved-up paychecks and a mountain of dreams. Marcus was a baby in my arms. We were a team then. I wondered when that team had disbanded. I wondered when my own son started looking at me and saw nothing of value. I was about to get my answer sooner than I thought. The knock on my door the next day was sharp, impatient. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Marcus and his wife Tiffany standing in the hallway. They brushed past me into the living room, their presence immediately making the space feel smaller, shabbier. Tiffany's eyes, the color of ice, did a quick, dismissive scan of my worn armchair, my collection of jazz records, the faint scent of lemon polish I used every Saturday. I saw her nose wrinkle ever so slightly. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, his posture radiating a tense energy. He wasn't here to share a moment of grief. He was here on a mission. "We need to talk," he said, forgoing any greeting. "About your mother?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "About the will. I'm here to manage your expectations, Walter." The use of my first name was a deliberate jab. It was the name his wife used for me, a way to strip me of my title, of my fatherhood. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending tone. "Look, don't go in there tomorrow hoping for some big, tearful reunion or a surprise inheritance. It's not going to happen. Mom made her empire long after she left you. She was a brilliant woman who moved on. She made sure her will was ironclad. You get nothing. Absolutely nothing. I just want to be clear on that." I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't shock, it wasn't even hurt anymore, it was clarity. I was finally seeing him for exactly who he was. Tiffany, sensing a moment to twist the knife, stepped forward and placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was cold. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a poison coated in sugar. "We just don't want you to be embarrassed or disappointed tomorrow," she cooed. "It's for the best, really, after all." And here her eyes lit up, her true nature shining through. "With $55 million, Marcus and I have so many big plans. It's our time now." That was it. That was the moment the last thread of hope I held for my son finally snapped. It wasn't about the money. It was about the utter erasure of my existence, of my contribution, of the life Lena and I had built together that gave him his start. They weren't just taking about an inheritance. They were trying to steal my history. I looked at my son, at his expensive suit, and the arrogant certainty in his eyes. And I thought about a Saturday afternoon 35 years ago in a park not 5 miles from where we now stood. I was teaching him to ride his first two-wheeler. He fell, scraped his knee, and cried, saying he couldn't do it. I remember picking him up, dusting him off, and telling him, "Son, the secret isn't in never falling. It's in getting back up and remembering who helped you learn to balance in the first place." He had clearly forgotten that lesson. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. The time for that was long past. I simply looked at both of them, my gaze steady, my face an unreadable mask of calm. This unnerved them more than any outburst could have. They expected a fight, a plea, a flicker of weakness. I gave them nothing. "I understand," I said softly. "Thank you for letting me know." I walked to the door and held it open for them. They exchanged a confused look, then swaggered out, their confidence returning now that the confrontation was over. They believed they had won. They believed they had put the old man in his place. As they walked down the hallway, I heard Tiffany laugh, a sharp, unpleasant sound. They were completely blind. They hadn't come here to deliver a warning. They had come here to sign their own sentence. I closed the door, and the silence that filled my apartment was no longer empty. It was heavy with purpose. It was the silence before the storm. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing a lobby that whispered of old money and quiet power. The law firm of Chen Whitley and Grove occupied the top floor of one of Atlanta's glass towers. The air itself smelled expensive, a mix of polished mahogany, worn leather, and the faint, dry scent of important paper. I walked across a plush carpet that swallowed the sound of my footsteps, my simple tweed jacket feeling a world away from the tailored suits that usually walked these halls. The receptionist led me to a large conference room with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a panoramic view of the city below. And there they were, Marcus and Tiffany. They were already seated at the head of the enormous table, positioned as if they were a king and queen holding court. My son Marcus was wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked like it was tailored to be just a little too tight, a display of muscularity and wealth. He looked less like a grieving son and more like a businessman about to close the biggest deal of his life. Tiffany sat beside him in a severe black dress that was more suited for a high-powered gala than a somber legal proceeding. A large, ostentatious designer handbag was placed on the table next to her, a silent declaration of her expectations. They saw me enter. Tiffany offered a tight plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus simply gave a curt nod, a gesture one might give to a waiter. There was no "hello, Dad," no "I'm glad you could make it." I was an afterthought, a piece of required but inconvenient administrative baggage. I didn't let it show. I walked to the far end of the long table and took a seat, putting a dozen empty chairs between us. My position wasn't one of submission, it was one of observation. From here I could see the entire stage and watch the actors perform. A few moments later, Mr. David Chen entered. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with a calm, professional demeanor that commanded respect. He carried a single thick, leather-bound folder. He nodded gravely to all of us. "Good morning," he began, his voice even. "I am David Chen. I was Lena's attorney and friend for over 30 years. On behalf of the firm, please accept our deepest condolences for your loss. She was a remarkable woman." Marcus cleared his throat impatiently. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Shall we begin?" Mr. Chen gave a slight, almost imperceptible frown at the interruption before opening the folder. "Of course. This is the last will and testament of Lena Hayes, signed and dated 18 months ago. It is legally sound and has been verified. I will now read it aloud as instructed." He put on a pair of reading glasses and began. The first few minutes were exactly as Marcus and Tiffany had anticipated. The language was dry, formal, a cascade of legal terms. I watched them, not the lawyer. I saw the tension in Marcus's shoulders slowly begin to relax. I saw Tiffany's posture soften as she leaned back in her chair. This was going according to their plan. Mr. Chen read from the page. "To my dear friend Dr. Eris Thorne, I leave my first edition collection of novels by Zora Neale Hurston in gratitude for a lifetime of intellectual debate and unwavering friendship. I remembered Eris, a brilliant professor. He and Lena could talk for hours, challenging each other, making each other sharper. Marcus had met him once and later called him a boring old man. To my sister Jeanette, I leave my collection of porcelain birds so that she may always have something beautiful to look at in the morning. Tiffany subtly rolled her eyes. To her, a collection of porcelain birds was just more clutter to dust. She couldn't comprehend the sentimental value, the shared history between two sisters. A charitable donation in the amount of $100,000 is to be made to the Atlanta Youth Music Program, an organization my son Marcus once attended. At the mention of his name, Marcus puffed out his chest slightly. He looked at Tiffany and gave her a small, self-satisfied nod, as if the donation were his own generous act rather than his mother's. He had forgotten, I was sure, that Lena had forced him to take piano lessons there, a discipline he had complained about endlessly. He had no connection to that place, but was happy to take the indirect credit. As Mr. Chen continued to read through the list of minor bequests and personal effects, I saw the true dynamic between my son and his wife. With every item given away to someone else, their impatience grew, but so did their confidence. These were just the crumbs. They were waiting for the cake. Tiffany began tapping her perfectly manicured fingernails on the mahogany table, a quiet, rhythmic drumbeat of greed. Marcus took a sip of water, his eyes scanning the room as if he were already measuring it for new furniture. Finally, Mr. Chen looked up from the page. And that concludes the specific bequests of personal artifacts and smaller cash distributions. That was the signal. The moment they had been waiting for. Marcus could no longer contain his smirk. It started at the corner of his mouth and spread across his face, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. He turned his head and looked directly at Tiffany. She mirrored his expression, her own smile sharp and victorious. She reached out and placed her hand over his on the table, a gesture of finality of a prize won. They believed it was over. They believed the rest, the real prize, the $55 million, would now fall into their laps by default. I saw that shared smile. It wasn't a smile of fond remembrance for a lost mother. It was the greedy, grasping smile of heirs who had finally outlasted the person whose wealth they coveted. In that single ugly expression, I saw the culmination of years of disrespect, of entitlement, of a profound and disappointing lack of character. And in that moment, I felt no anger. Not anymore. The hurt had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. I knew what was written on the next page of that will, and I knew with every fiber of my being that they deserved exactly what was coming to them. The triumphant smirk on my son's face was a terrible, beautiful thing to behold. It was the look of a man who believed he had just crossed the finish line of a race he hadn't even run. Tiffany squeezed his hand, her knuckles white, her own smile a sharp, predatory slash. They were reveling in their victory, completely unaware that the real verdict was yet to be read. From my end of the table, I watched them. I felt like a geologist watching a mountain, knowing that deep within its core, a fault line was about to give way. Mr. Chen turned the final page of the will. The paper made a soft, crisp sound in the silent room, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water from the glass beside him, his movements measured and unhurried. He adjusted his reading glasses on the bridge of his nose, his eyes scanning the page before him. To Marcus and Tiffany, this small pause must have felt like an eternity of needless procedure. To me, it felt like a moment of quiet ceremony, the calm before the tide changes. I thought about paper, how something so fragile, so unassuming could hold the entire weight of a life. How a few carefully chosen words written in ink decades ago could possess more power than all the ambition and arrogance my son could ever muster. Finally, Mr. Chen cleared his throat. The sound brought Marcus and Tiffany to full attention, their bodies rigid with anticipation. And now, the lawyer said, his voice retaining its steady professional cadence, we address the final disposition of the residual estate of Lena Hayes. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his elbows on the polished table, the fabric of his expensive suit straining at the shoulders. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of intense, focused greed. This was it, the main event. Mr. Chen continued. The residual estate comprises all remaining assets, liquid and invested, held within the portfolio known as the Polaris Fund. He paused, looking down at the document. As of the close of markets yesterday, this fund holds a current valuation of $55 million, $312,457.18. The number spoken with such precision seemed to suck all the air out of the room. $55 million. I saw Marcus's eyes widen. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench. This was even more than he had expected. He shot a quick, ecstatic glance at Tiffany, who was now gripping the edge of the table, her breathing shallow. They were standing on the peak of the mountain, gazing down at the kingdom they believed was now theirs. They were so high up they couldn't possibly see the ground crumbling beneath their feet. I remained perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. I had heard that number before in private conversations with Mr. Chen over the past few days, but hearing it now in this room in front of my son gave it a different weight. It wasn't just money. It was the culmination of a single hopeful decision made a lifetime ago. It was a story, and my son was about to hear the ending for the very first time. Mr. Chen's voice cut through the thick anticipation, calm and unwavering. He read the next sentence, the one sentence upon which everything balanced. It is the explicit and binding directive of the deceased Lena Hayes that this portfolio in its entirety is to be... He made the slightest of pauses, just a breath, just long enough for Marcus's hopes to reach their absolute zenith. Returned. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into a perfectly still pond. Returned. It was a strange word. Not bequeathed, not inherited, not given. Returned. I saw the confusion cloud my son's face. The triumphant expression dissolved, replaced by a deep furrowed brow. He tilted his head as if he had misheard. Tiffany's face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. The gears were turning in her mind much faster than in my son's. She sensed the danger. Mr. Chen continued reading, finishing the clause that would change everything. Returned to its original and sole legal owner in accordance with the pre-existing and binding trust agreement notarized on April 12, 1988. Complete, utter silence. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. The hum of the city beyond the glass walls seemed to have vanished. All that existed was that one sentence hanging in the air, refusing to be dismissed. Marcus just stared at the lawyer, his mouth slightly open. The words had been spoken in English, but they might as well have been in a foreign language. They did not compute with the reality he had constructed for himself. Tiffany was the first to break the spell. She leaned over and whispered to Marcus, her voice a frantic, desperate hiss that was audible across the silent room. "What does that mean? What trust agreement? What is he talking about?" But Mr. Chen did not answer her. Instead, he slowly, deliberately took off his reading glasses. He placed them gently on top of the will. He folded his hands. And then he lifted his head, and his eyes found mine from all the way across that long mahogany table. For the very first time that day, the lawyer's professional mask fell away. A small, knowing smile touched the corners of his lips. It was not a smile of pity or of gloating. It was a smile of respect. A smile that acknowledged a secret, long kept, a strategy perfectly executed, a truth finally brought into the light. He spoke directly to me, his voice clear and resonant, filling the cavernous silence. He ignored my son and daughter-in-law as if they were no longer in the room. "Mr. Walter Hayes," he said, and the formal title, the sound of my own name spoken with such dignity, was a balm on old wounds. "What that means," he continued, his smile widening just a fraction, "is that the entirety of the Polaris Fund, all $55 million of it, is, and in fact has always legally been yours." He held my gaze. "Congratulations." For a long moment, the only sound in that vast, silent room was the frantic beating of my own heart. There. Chen's final word, "congratulations," did not land like a firework. It landed like a heavy stone, sending silent, powerful ripples across the polished surface of the table. I kept my eyes on my son. I saw the sequence of emotions play across his face like a fast-moving storm. First there was utter blank confusion, as if the lawyer had spoken in a language he had never heard. His brow was furrowed, his mouth agape. Then, as the meaning of the words began to seep through the thick walls of his arrogance, the confusion curdled into disbelief. And right behind the disbelief, I saw it coming. A dark, ugly wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It started with a low sound in his throat, a strangled growl of protest. Then he shot to his feet. The heavy leather chair he was sitting in screeched backwards, scraping violently against the polished floor. His hands, balled into white-knuckled fists, slammed down onto the mahogany table. The crystal water glasses jumped the pitcher rattling against the wood. The sound was like an explosion in the cathedral-like quiet of the office. "Impossible!" he roared, his voice cracking with fury. He wasn't looking at the lawyer. He was looking at me. His face was a mask of crimson rage, a vein throbbing in his temple. "That is absolutely impossible. That was my mother's money. She built that. She built everything." He took a step away from the table, pacing like a caged animal, gesturing wildly at me with a shaking finger. Him! What did he ever do? He was a measly clerk his whole life, a nobody, a relic. How could he have a claim to any of it? This is a joke. It's a sick, twisted joke. Tiffany, seeing her $55 million dream evaporating before her very eyes, found her own voice, and it was a shrill, piercing shriek. "This is a forgery. It has to be Mr. Chen. I don't know what kind of scheme he's pulled you into, but we will not stand for this. We will sue. We will sue you. We will sue this firm, and we will sue him for every last cent he has. We will drag this through the courts for the next 20 years if we have to." They were a whirlwind of noise and fury, of threats and insults. And through it all, Mr. Chen and I remained perfectly still. The lawyer sat calmly in his chair, his hands folded, his expression unchanged. He was a stone in the middle of a raging river, unmoved by the chaos. And I just watched my son. I saw the tantrum of a boy who had just been told he couldn't have the one toy he wanted most in the world. His rage wasn't born of a sense of injustice. It was born of a lifetime of entitlement, of a deeply ingrained belief that my life, my contributions, my very history were worth nothing. To him, it was simply impossible that I, his father, could be the source of the wealth he so desperately craved. It broke the entire story he had told himself about his own life. I felt a profound sadness wash over me, a pity so deep it almost hurt. This was what he had become. A man whose only response to a truth he didn't like was to try and destroy it with noise and anger. Mr. Chen let their initial tirade burn itself out. When their shouting finally subsided into heavy, ragged breaths, he made his move. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply reached into the leather-bound folder in front of him and retrieved a much thinner file. The manila folder was old, its edges softened and frayed by the passage of 37 years. The papers inside were yellowed with age. He didn't toss it or slap it down. With a quiet, deliberate grace, he slid the old file across the vast, gleaming table. It glided silently over the wood, a vessel of history coming to a soft stop directly in front of my son's clenched fists. Marcus stared down at the old folder as if it were a venomous snake. Then Mr. Chen spoke. His voice was still calm, still measured, but now it held a new edge of finality. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. "There will be no lawsuit," he said, his words cutting cleanly through the tense air. "There will be no courtroom battle, because this matter was already settled, signed, and sealed long before you were old enough to drive a car." He gestured with an open hand toward the file. "That Marcus is the original notarized trust agreement from 1988. If you turn to the final page, you will see your mother's signature. It has been authenticated by 3 separate experts in the last month. And if you examine the document clipped to the inside cover..." He paused, letting his words sink in. "That is a certified copy of a bank statement from April 12, 1988. It documents a one-time wire transfer for $50,000, the seed capital for the Polaris Fund. Mr. Chen leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering, and delivered the final, fatal blow. The transfer was made from a savings account held at Georgia Fidelity Bank, an account that was in one name and one name only, Mr. Walter Hayes. The rage in the room finally broke, crashing against the hard shore of reality and receding into a stunned, defeated silence. Marcus sank back into his chair, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the yellowed papers on the table, as if they were the wreckage of a ship he thought was unsinkable. Tiffany was silent for the first time that day, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. All their noise, all their threats had been silenced by a few simple, undeniable facts written in ink a lifetime ago. Mr. Chen looked at me and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was my turn to speak. I took a deep breath, the air feeling cool and clean in my lungs. "You look at me," I began, my voice quiet but carrying across the long table. "And you see an old man in a tweed jacket. You see a small apartment and a simple life, a relic. And that's all right. That's the story you told yourself because it was convenient. But that isn't the whole story. And today you're going to hear the rest of it." I looked at my son. His eyes full of confusion and a dawning horror finally met mine. We need to go back. Back to 1988. You were just a boy then, Marcus. You wouldn't remember. Your mother and I, we didn't have much. We had a small 2-bedroom house in a neighborhood you wouldn't even drive through today. We had one car that I had to fix myself most weekends. But we had each other, and we had ambition. We were a team. I wasn't just a clerk's son. I was a junior analyst at a small investment firm downtown. My job was to read the reports that nobody else wanted. I spent my nights under a cheap desk lamp surrounded by stacks of paper looking for needles in haystacks. I was looking for patterns for the hidden gems the big players overlooked. And your mother? She wasn't the CEO of a corporation yet. She was running a catering business out of our own kitchen. She'd be up at 4 a.m. baking, building her own small dream with flour on her hands and fire in her eyes. She was the smartest, sharpest woman I had ever met. We didn't have money, but we weren't poor. We were building. Every dollar we saved went into a coffee can we kept hidden in the pantry. That was our future. I paused, letting the memory settle in the room. One night late, I found something. It was a company no one had heard of, a tiny outfit out of California run by a couple of kids in a garage. They were talking about something new, a way to make computers personal to put them in every home. Everyone on Wall Street thought they were crazy. Their financials were a joke. Investing in them wasn't just risky, it was considered financial suicide. But I read their technical papers. I stayed up for 3 nights in a row, running the numbers, looking at the potential. And I saw it. I saw the future in that little report. It was a gut feeling, yes, but it was backed by the math. The math was sound. I went to your mother. We sat at that same small kitchen table where you used to do your homework. I spread the papers out and I told her, I want to take everything, all of it. The $50,000 we had saved our entire lives. I want to put it all on this one bet. I looked at Marcus. You see me as a man who takes no risks. But that's because you never saw the man I was. Your mother, she listened for over an hour. She challenged me. She asked all the right questions. She saw the flaws, but she also saw what I saw. She saw the glimmer of a revolution. But there was a problem. At the time, I was trying to start my own small business on the side, a little real estate venture. It was heavily leveraged, full of debt. It was a risky time. We were worried. If my side business failed, creditors could come after all our personal assets. They could seize our house, our car, and they could seize that $50,000 investment. That one single bet that I believed deep in my bones would change our lives forever. So that night at that kitchen table, we didn't just dream. We strategized. We were partners. We decided to build a firewall, a legal protection for our future. Your mother's catering business was small, but it was stable and debt-free. She was the safe harbor. So we went to a young lawyer, a man not much older than Mr. Chen is now, and we created the Polaris Fund. We put the entire $50,000 into a trust. We placed that trust in her name. She would be the trustee, the manager, the public face of the investment. It was her job to protect it and help it grow. But we signed a private notarized agreement, that document right there in front of you. That document states in clear, simple language that the seed capital was mine, the ownership was mine, and that upon her death, or if the trust were ever dissolved, the assets would revert entirely to me. It wasn't about a lack of trust in each other. It was the ultimate act of trust. I was trusting her with our future, and she was trusting me with my vision. I let out a long, slow breath. The story had been locked inside me for so long. We never spoke of it again. Not in front of you, not in front of anyone. It was our secret. My real estate venture eventually failed just as we feared it might. We lost a little money. But the Polaris Fund, it was safe, untouchable. And that little company in California, it wasn't a joke. It became a giant. And your mother, a brilliant woman, managed that fund with incredible skill. She nurtured it. She made smart moves. She grew it beyond even my wildest dreams. And even after we grew apart, after our marriage ended, we never broke that trust. It was a pact, a piece of our shared history that stood separate from everything else. We knew the truth. I leaned forward slightly, making sure my son could see the absolute sincerity in my eyes. So, you see, Marcus, your mother's will, it wasn't a gift to me. It wasn't a final act of cruelty to you. It was an act of honor. It was the final balancing of a ledger that was started 37 years ago in a small kitchen by two people who were a team. She wasn't giving me her money. I let the final words land with all the weight of the truth. She was simply returning mine. The truth landed in the center of the room and absorbed all the sound, all the anger, all the bluster. What was left was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with the weight of 37 years. Marcus stood frozen, his face a canvas of shock and disbelief. Tiffany stared at the old trust agreement on the table, this ghost from the past, as if it had personally betrayed her. Their rage had been a wildfire, but the simple, undeniable truth was a downpour extinguishing the flames and leaving behind only the cold, soaked ashes of their arrogance. I watched them. I saw the gears turning behind their eyes. Their first strategy, brute force anger and intimidation, had failed spectacularly. It had shattered against a wall of facts they never knew existed. And so, like cornered animals, they changed tactics. The shift was as sudden as it was sickening to witness. The hardness in Tiffany's face melted away, replaced by a mask of soft, trembling vulnerability. She took a tentative step forward, her hands clasped together in front of her as if in prayer. Her voice, once so shrill and sharp, was now a soft, wounded whisper. "Walter, I had no idea. We had no idea. We've been so foolish." Marcus took his cue. The angry, defiant posture dissolved. His shoulders slumped. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of contrived despair. He looked at me, and the coldness in his eyes was replaced by a desperate, pleading warmth. It was the most dishonest expression I had ever seen on his face. "Dad," he said. The word was a clumsy, foreign object in his mouth. He hadn't called me that in years, not with any sincerity. It was a key he was now trying, hoping it would unlock the vault. "Dad, you can't mean to keep all of it. We're your family. We made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I was arrogant. I was a bad son. But please, don't do this to us." As he spoke, my mind began to drift. His words were just noise, a meaningless static washing over a landscape of memory. He continued, his voice cracking with false emotion. "We have debts, Dad. The mortgage on the house. You know the neighborhood. The payments are huge. The cars. We have to maintain a certain image for my job." As he said the word job, my mind flashed back. It was a rainy Tuesday 2 years ago. My old Buick had died on the side of I-285. The engine just gave up. I was stranded. I called him. I could hear the clinking of glasses and laughter in the background. "Dad, I'm right in the middle of a client dinner," he'd said, his voice thick with annoyance. "It's a really big deal. Can't you just call a tow truck or something? I'll send you the money for it." I sat in that cold car for 2 hours waiting for a tow. I paid for it with my pension check. The money he promised never arrived. Tiffany joined in, her performance escalating. She managed to squeeze out a tear, which she dabbed at delicately with the back of her hand. "And the children, Walter. Think of the children, your grandchildren. What will happen to them? We'll lose the house. They'll have to leave their school, their friends. It would destroy them." As she spoke of my grandchildren, another memory surfaced sharp and clear. My 73rd birthday. I had spent the day at home hoping the phone would ring. It never did. The house was quiet. A week later, I was scrolling through the internet and saw a photo Tiffany had posted. It was the whole family, Marcus, Tiffany, and my 2 beautiful grandchildren, grinning on a white sand beach in Florida. They were all holding colorful drinks with little umbrellas in them. Her caption read, "A much-needed family getaway to escape the cold. #blessed." My birthday had been on the first day of that getaway. It had gone completely unmentioned. Marcus saw my silence as an opening. He grew bolder in his pleading. "Dad, I know I haven't been there for you. I was wrong. I was stupid. I let Tiffany's parents get in my head. But I can change. We can fix this. We can be a family again. Just help us. Your mother, Lena, she wouldn't want to see us like this. She would want you to provide for her grandchildren." Using his mother's name. A desperate, cowardly move. And as he did, one final memory played in my mind, as vivid as if it were happening right now. It was Christmas the last time I had been invited to their house. I had worn my best shirt, a simple blue button-down that I had ironed meticulously that morning. I thought I looked nice. As I was putting on my coat to leave, I overheard Tiffany whisper to Marcus in the foyer, They thought I was out of earshot. "Thank God he's finally going," she'd said. "That sad old shirt of his is just so depressing to look at." And then I heard them both share a quiet, cruel little laugh. I came back to the present. I looked at their faces etched with a desperate, hopeful plea. They had finished their performance. They had talked about family, about their children, about their supposed regret. Their words were a river of excuses, a flood of manufactured sentiment. But my mind was a slideshow of evidence. Each memory was a receipt, a documented proof of their long and consistent indifference. Each forgotten birthday, each unanswered call, each casual insult. They were looking at me now, waiting for my forgiveness, for my generosity. They were waiting for the old man they thought they knew, the soft-hearted pushover, the relic to give in. They didn't understand. It was far too late for forgiveness. This was no longer a matter of emotion. This was a matter of accounting. And I had all the receipts. I let their pleading hang in the air for a long moment, letting the silence press down on them. Their faces were a desperate mixture of hope and fear. They had played their last card, an appeal to a familial bond they themselves had spent years destroying. Now they waited for me, the man they had dismissed and disrespected, to decide their fate. I looked at my son, at the man who wore my last name, but had forgotten its meaning, and I finally spoke. My voice was not filled with rage or triumph. It was calm, measured, and final. "I have listened to you," I began, my words cutting through the tension. "Now you will listen to me. This isn't about revenge, Marcus. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This is about balance. It's an adjustment to a ledger that has been unbalanced for far too long. A correction." I saw a flicker of confusion in their eyes. They had expected either a total rejection or a complete surrender. They were not prepared for a calculation. "I will not let you walk away with nothing," I said, and a flash of hope lit up their faces. It was a cruel, fleeting light. "That is not my way. First, I will contact your banks directly. I will pay off the remaining principal balance on your mortgage and the loans on both of your cars. As of next week, you will be free of your major debts." Tiffany let out a small, audible gasp. Marcus looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe his ears. They thought this was it. They thought they had won. "Second," I continued, and the hardness in my voice snuffed out their premature celebration, "I will arrange for a monthly stipend to be paid into your account. The amount will be $5,000. The hope on Marcus's face instantly curdled into disbelief, then insult. $5,000 a month was a fortune to the man I used to be, but to him, in his world of country clubs and European cars, it was a pittance, an allowance. "Third," I said, leaning forward just enough to ensure they understood the gravity of my final point. "And this is the most important term. There will be no negotiation on this. That stipend will continue for exactly 12 months, 1 year. On the first day of the 13th month, the payments will stop, permanently. After that, you are on your own." I let the terms settle. The debt relief was a cushion. The allowance was a timer. The deadline was a cliff. "It is time for you to learn what it feels like to build something, son," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with a sense of grim purpose. "Not just to maintain an image, but to actually build a life. You need to learn the profound difference between waiting to inherit a fortune and earning a living." The collapse was absolute. For them, this was a humiliation far worse than being cut off completely. Being given nothing would have made them martyrs in their own minds. This made them dependents. It made them children. Marcus stood there, his mouth opening and closing silently, no words coming out. The pleading mask was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed look of a man who had been utterly and completely defeated. All the fight, all the arrogance had drained out of him, leaving an empty, humiliated shell. Tiffany's face was a storm of fury, but she was smart enough to know that any protest now would be useless. She had lost all leverage. The power had not just shifted. It had been fundamentally and irrevocably reversed. They were no longer the ones managing my expectations. I was now dictating the strict, unalterable terms of their survival. My business was concluded. 6 months have passed since that day in the lawyer's office. The echoes of that confrontation have long since faded, replaced by a quiet that feels earned and peaceful. You might picture me living in some sprawling mansion now, surrounded by the trappings of immense wealth. But that was never the point. That was my son's dream, not mine. My new home is a modest but beautiful brick house with a garden out back. It's the garden that I love most. I spend my mornings there with my hands in the soil, feeling the warmth of the Georgia sun on my back. It's a simple, honest pleasure. The money, the $55 million, is not sitting idle. It is also doing a kind of gardening. I used a significant portion of it to establish a foundation, one I named the Lena and Walter Hayes Foundation. Its sole purpose is to provide seed capital for young African-American entrepreneurs here in Atlanta. It finds the ones with brilliant ideas but empty pockets, the ones who just need a single calculated bet to change their lives. It is a legacy of how things started, a way to honor the partnership Lena and I once had, and a way to build something that will outlast me. And Marcus, I hear things. He and Tiffany had to sell their massive house. The luxury cars are gone. Their world has shrunk to the size of their new reality. For the first time in his adult life, my son has a real job. He's a sales manager at a respectable car dealership. I'm told he works 60 hours a week. I imagine it's been a difficult adjustment. Do we talk? Not often. Not yet. A lifetime of disrespect isn't a wound that can be healed by a single legal document. The silence between us was built brick by brick over decades. It will take time to dismantle. But last week my phone rang. It was him. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't complain or plead. He just called to tell me that my granddaughter, his daughter, had won first prize in her middle school's science fair. The call lasted less than 5 minutes. It was awkward and stilted, but it was real. It was the first conversation we've had in years where he wasn't trying to get something from me. He was just sharing a piece of his life, a piece of the new life he is being forced to build for himself. The door between us is no longer slammed shut and locked. It is cracked open just a little. For the first time, our relationship, if it is to be rebuilt, will stand on a new foundation. Not on his expectations, but on my truth. A truth he is finally forced to respect. Legacy is not a dollar amount you leave behind. It's the foundation upon which you built it. For years, I watched my son admire the skyscraper my ex-wife and I built, forgetting the single solid brick I laid as its cornerstone. Wealth can be a magnifying glass. It doesn't change who people are, it simply makes them more of what they already were. True inheritance isn't something you are given. It's the wisdom you earn when you realize you must build your own foundation, one honest brick at a time. If you believe a true legacy is earned, not given, hit the like button, subscribe for more stories, and let us know what you would do in the comments below.